In 2017, I uploaded my first ever video to this channel. It was a brief review of an overlooked shooter on the original Xbox called Brute Force. In fact, it was so brief that it was only 6 minutes long. The last 2 of those minutes relegated to an unscripted end slate segment. It was my first time ever doing scripted content after about a year of exclusively doing Let's Plays, so my style and performance were a bit rough. But despite these little nitpicks I have, the game overall is actually a lot of fun. Don't bother looking for the video now, I've long since removed it. In the months and years since publishing it, with my style of video making seemingly improving, coming back to Brute Force and giving it a proper, more in-depth look was always in the back of my mind. I could have just left it as it was, a short, hastily made 6-minute video where I spend the whole time talking like this. There really is no penalty for dying other than not being able to use that character's special ability. Even the money you gain from missions doesn't mean anything, it's basically just a high score. Which stinks because it would have been cool to use that money to upgrade your characters in some way. Maybe upgrade Hawk's health meter so she doesn't die in 3 hits? But no. No, I honestly think that this game deserves better than that. We can't mention the original Xbox without, of course, mentioning Halo Combat Evolved. Halo 1 was such an important game to Microsoft's first gaming system that it was more than a little influential to the types of games being made for it. Sure, Microsoft would put their stamp on games of a wide variety of genres, but the Xbox brand became pretty synonymous with shooters, thanks in no small part to the breakout success of Halo. Now, with all of that out of the way, you're probably wondering what the hell Brute Force is even about. Well, I'm so glad you asked. Brute Force takes place in the year 2340. The human race has colonized many planets across the Ulysses galaxy, and human cloning has become a common practice, outright replacing the need to train human soldiers. A government known as the Confederation of Allied Worlds, or CONFED for short, governs all of these colonized worlds, as well as several extraterrestrial worlds, and protects them from hostile forces. The CONFED utilizes groups of these Special Force clone soldiers to carry out missions across the galaxy, and it's here we're introduced to the newly commissioned 23rd Unit, codenamed Brute Force. Over the course of the game, you'll encounter black market weapons dealings, crazed alien cultists, and how these and more are all connected to each other. As someone who can usually find something to enjoy in a game's story, I'm not gonna lie, I tend to forget large chunks of the story in this game. Now, I don't know if that's a failing of the game or me just not paying enough attention, but I honestly kinda sorta didn't care about the story. It's not bad, it does come together in the end, but I just don't think they tell you enough of it. All you get are these mission briefings before each mission, your objective, and that's really about it. But for me, the gameplay is enough to carry the game's 8-hour runtime. Brute Force is a third-person squad-based shooter that'll take you across several different locations across 6 different planets in the Ulysses system. The game is broken into 18 missions, each of which with a differing objective to complete, and will take you roughly 20 to 30 minutes each to complete. So there's your first 2 differences to Halo. Not only is it in the third person, though the controls are pretty similar, there's a squad mechanic at the forefront here, with 4 playable characters total in the single-player campaign. Over the course of the first handful of missions, you're slowly introduced to your 4 playable characters. First, there's Tex, the heavy weapons guy.
I am heavy weapons guy.
He's capable of carrying and utilizing the heaviest weapons in the game, and therefore has the highest damage output. He also has the best defense and can take a shot like a champ. I love playing as him, personally, even if he is a bit of a sexist.
Artificial and a woman. Bratton.
Then you get the feral alien character, Brutus, who, from a control and weapon specialization perspective, is quite possibly the most well-rounded of the group. He can't hold more than 1 heavy weapon at a time like Tex can, but can still hold his own well enough with medium-sized weapons, and has a decent running speed and defense. Thirdly, there's Hawk. She's the fastest runner of the group and has the special ability of turning invisible for stealth kills, and bypassing enemy security systems, at the cost of being the weakest physically and not being able to use heavy guns whatsoever. And then finally, there's Flint, the sniper of the group. While it's true that any of the 4 characters can use sniper rifles, Flint has an advantage over the other 3. She's what the game's lore calls a synthetic human. Basically a cyborg, which means she doesn't have lungs and therefore doesn't need to breathe, which in turn doesn't affect her aim when using a sniper rifle. Each of the 4 characters have their own unique strengths and weaknesses, as I've just alluded to, but they also have their own special abilities, which uses the stamina meter located underneath the health meter. I mentioned that Hawk can turn invisible. Flint gets this almost Zelda-style Z targeting that amplifies her aiming, and can even be used when she's not sniping. It's very useful. Brutus' special ability is really interesting. Tapping into his feral abilities, he can go into this sort of beast mode where he can see an enemy's heat signature, which comes in handy during firefights. And when charging into an enemy while in this mode, kills them instantly. He also gets regenerating health while in this mode, which is also handy for when you're out of medkits. And finally, Tex's special is his ability to wield and fire both of his 2-weapon loadout at the same time for some real damage. It's an excellent crowd control ability and one of my personal favorites to use, especially when you have 2 of the same weapon in your loadout. I don't really know why you can only do this as Tex though, but that's whatever. All of this is activated with the white button on the Xbox controller, or the left bumper on the 360 controller if you're playing this on an Xbox 360, which is actually how I was able to capture footage for this video. Each character also gets passive abilities like Tex's trap disarming skill, Flint being impervious to poisonous gas, and Hawk and Brutus' ability to sense traps and enemies. So you're probably thinking, wow, with all these neat weapons and special abilities, all of these characters must be fun to play as, right? Well, yes and no. While they all have their plus sides, the game being focused on managing a squad does come with its caveats. The game sort of expects you, or at the very least would like for you, to play as all 4 characters utilizing their unique strengths, while also taking their weaknesses into account. You know, sniping with Flint, scouting out areas as Hawk, running and gunning with Tex. But I found that the game doesn't accommodate to that particular playstyle 100% of the time. I think the biggest shortcoming to that focus on squad mechanics is all consolidated down into one character, Hawk. As I mentioned earlier, Hawk is physically the weakest character in the game. Not just in that she uses light weapons, but also the fact that her health meter is the smallest of the 4. And she can only take 3, maybe 4 hits from enemies before she dies. So now you're probably thinking, well, yeah, she's the stealth character, you're supposed to use her to sneak around and scout ahead with her invisibility. Well, yeah, you're right about that. Though the downside to that is, since her stamina meter is also the smallest of the group, you don't really get to use her invisibility in any real meaningful way, since it runs out pretty quickly. I actually had a moment where I tried playing the game the way it wanted me to, and scouted ahead to scope out an enemy stronghold. And my stamina meter started running out before I could get a good look around, and I panicked and tried to bail, only to run right into a mine and die instantly. Oh yeah, and get used to that. If you play as Hawk, you're gonna die. A lot. Ah, shit! It's almost prophetic that the very first cutscene we see of her is her getting murked. And because her stamina recharges so damn slowly, she becomes far more of a liability to the squad than I would have liked. Which is a shame because when you're running and gunning as her, she's actually fun to play as with her superior speed. But she just cannot take a hit. Ah well, at least she's nice to look at. Especially from behind.
Look at that big ass, look at that big juicy booty.
I guess this is a good place to mention where the cloning aspect of the plot comes into play. More than anything, it's an in-universe explanation as to how the characters can die during one mission and then come back alive and well in the next. When a character dies, they and their special abilities are lost to you for the rest of the mission. And if all 4 of your characters die, the only real penalty is your cash reward at the ends of missions. Oh, what's that? Cash reward, you say? Well, don't get too excited, it's literally just a score. You can't actually use that money for anything, which, in my opinion, was a real missed opportunity. It could have gone towards upgrades for your characters, like increased health or upgraded armor, which, for example, would have made Hawk a much more viable character. I'm sorry I'm ragging on you so much, Hawk. I love you, I just don't love playing as you most of the time. In fact, I find the shooting itself to be a whole lot of fun, no matter who you're playing as. It's definitely the game's single strongest aspect, in my opinion. So it's a good thing you can actually tell your squad mates to stay behind while you pick techs and just run into an area guns blazing and get the job done that way. Though, when the game tasks you with an assassination mission and you nail that headshot as Flint, oh my lord, is it ever satisfying. Oh wow, I didn't even mention the squad controls, did I? Holding a direction on the D-pad to select a squad mate, and then using the 4 face buttons to issue a command, you can assign your squad mates to follow behind you and cover you at a distance, or stay put and guard an area, or move to a spot of your choosing, or even go aggro and actively seek out and take out any enemies in the area. That's really about as far as the squad mechanics go in this game, but with this being such a small linear game, it really only goes about as far as it really needs to. Simple, yes, but effective enough. Plus, again, it's largely optional. If you want to just go through the game mowing down enemies as Tex or Brutus, it's totally possible. The only change I would make to the controls is I wish the game would let you aim down sights. Or, I guess since this is a third-person shooter, it would be zoom in a little more for better accuracy. I know this isn't really fair to ask since this game came out during a time before shooters really let you do that, but I feel like I would be a little bit more in control of my aim if that were here. I would like to be able to make more precise shots without sniping sometimes. I can't blame the game too much for that though, it's just a personal preference. The game does zoom the aim in a little when you start firing though, and that's usually enough, so I guess I can't complain that much. Also, I wish the game would let you snap the camera back behind you when you change direction, instead of having to slowly rotate it all the way back. It does let me invert the camera controls, but it won't let me adjust the speed at which I do so, which kinda sucks. I really wish the game had an option to toggle the crouching on and off too, instead of requiring you to hold down the left stick in order to stay crouched. That was honestly pretty annoying. But aside from those nitpicks, I'd say the controls are rather smooth and easy to get the hang of. The game usually does a good job of keeping you supplied on things like ammo and medkits, but there was a moment on one of the Osiris missions where I had Tex run completely out of ammo, therefore making him totally useless. Osiris has you scurrying off against these alien cultists who don't use weapons, so you're kinda at the mercy of these outposts where the Confed will teleport in weapons, ammo, and medkits. This is another area where I think being able to use the money you gain from completing missions would have helped you. Like, you could use it to buy ammo or medkits, or something to recover stamina with. There are no stamina recovery items in this game. The only way to recover stamina is to let the meter recharge very slowly on its own. You can recharge it quicker by crouching and holding still, but fuck me, dude. Stamina recovery items would have been a welcome addition. And as for the guns themselves, they come in 2 flavors, ballistic and laser weapons. Whenever I play a game that gives you both of these type of weapons, like, for example, the later Fallout games, I always tend to go with the regular ballistic weapons, as in guns that use actual bullets. I don't know why, I guess I find myself more fascinated with more realistic looking guns than I do fantasy sci-fi laser weapons. I don't know, I've always been like that. There are some good laser weapons, but some of these, I don't know how to describe it. They don't feel as good to use. They fire a little too slowly for my liking, and they feel overall pretty weak. I don't really prefer using them. A lot of the weapons are fun to use, like the minigun, the assault rifle, the rocket launcher, and even some of the faster firing laser weapons. But some of these weapons really lack any sense of impact, like the shotgun. Whenever you use a shotgun in any other game, there's always this feedback, this visceral feeling you get when firing it, you know? You expect it to be punchy and feel like it's hitting the enemy like a truck. That sadly isn't the case here. The shotgun in this game doesn't feel like anything. It's weird. There's no punch, no impact. It gets the job done, sure, but it doesn't feel as powerful as other video game shotguns. I just replace it with something better the first chance I get. The 6 worlds you'll be completing missions in all look unique from one another, but you will be revisiting them multiple times throughout the game, as the game will ping-pong you between planets for each mission. My personal favorite is the planet Feryx, Brutus's home planet. I really dig the jungle atmosphere. It looks really nice and vibrant, even if the only enemies you'll be shooting at are just palette-swapped Brutuses. Caspian has you facing off against mutated enemies in shanty towns and factory remnants, as the planet once hosted radioactive activity, and the colonists have mutated due to prolonged exposure, driven mad and attacking you on sight. I love the gloomier atmosphere of this planet, but not so much the mutants that kamikaze you. The shoreline on planet Estuary reminds me a lot of the beach in Halo 1. Maybe that was intentional. Really, the only planet I didn't care for was Osiris, the volcano-looking place. Not only do you have level hazards in the form of lava pools, but you also have enemies that can teleport using special towers. And also, these enemies called firehounds that jump out of the lava and shoot fire at you, which really hurts. Even Tex can get killed by these things if you aren't carefully watching your health. These guys can do that much damage. They do more damage to him than a freaking missile in the face. I always feel a sense of dread when I know the next mission will be taking place on Osiris.
Nav beacon updated.
Yeah, get used to hearing that. Whenever you revisit a planet, the layouts will be different, but the backdrops will all be the same. Feryx will always be a jungle, Caspian will always be a mining facility, Osiris will always be a volcano world. You won't be spending too much time on one planet, so none of the planets ever really feel like they outstay their welcome. Like I mentioned earlier, the only real penalty to dying is your score at the end of each mission. If all 4 of your characters die, you can just restart from where you died with all 4 of your squad mates at full health. It's nothing more than a slap on the wrist, but it can still be really annoying when it happens and you have one less comrade to help you during really heavy gunfights. If your whole squad dies during a boss fight, the game will respawn all 4 of your teammates at full health and just continue the fight as if nothing happened. I don't think I've ever seen a game do this. Death is such a non-issue in this game. I actually had a moment where all of my squad mates died during a boss fight, and me and the boss killed each other at the exact same time, and then the game just asked me which character I wanted to respawn as so I could finish out the level. So, it's good that I didn't have to redo that whole boss fight, but it's still a little jarring. And kind of funny, if I'm being honest. Speaking of boss fights, there are only about 4, maybe 5 of them throughout the whole game, but definitely expect your entire squad to get wiped out at least once with each of these. I actually tried getting cheeky with one of the later ones and tried to kill him instantly with Hawk's insta-kill energy blade, but the game wouldn't let me do it. I had to actually fight him normally. Kinda sucks that this game puts all this emphasis on Hawk's ability to stealth kill enemies, but I couldn't do it with a boss character as an alternate means of taking him out. I know he's shown wearing heavy armor, but that doesn't stop me from doing it with other heavily armored goons. With this being a squad-based game, multiplayer is definitely possible. While it has the very obvious split-screen mode for up to 4 players for the campaign and the offline multiplayer modes, Brute Force also uses the original Xbox's System Link feature, meaning that up to 16 possible players can play it at the same time. Though this is a costly measure, as this mode requires multiple separate copies of the same game, separate Xbox consoles, and separate TVs all hooked up to each other. Not to mention all the cables needed for it. I guess this layout is ideal for a sort of Xbox LAN party, but I don't see it being too practical for casual use. So now you're probably wondering, oh, what about the online modes? There's clearly an Xbox Live logo on the box. Well, the only Xbox Live functionality that this game contains is the ability to download new multiplayer maps and extra campaign story missions. I sadly don't have footage for that, as I never messed with Xbox Live on the original Xbox, and I couldn't get any footage of the multiplayer with bots, as it requires a second human player, or at least a second controller. So, in short, the game does not, or maybe I should say did not, support online multiplayer of any kind. Another missed opportunity. Though, in the competitive multiplayer mode, you can play as any of the game's enemies by collecting hidden DNA canisters in the campaign. Wish I could show that off. As a single-player game, Brute Force is best enjoyed in short 1-hour bursts. But if you do have a friend or two to play this with, even if you do have to resort to doing split screen, I can imagine you'd still have a pretty good time with it. I say I can imagine because I've only ever played this as a single-player game. But you can go through the whole campaign in multiplayer, so there's that. It's a fun game with a few good ideas, but a couple of those ideas aren't really fleshed out enough, and because of that, the game doesn't really rise above anything more than just decent. It's dirt cheap nowadays, but if you want to play this game today, then hopefully you either have a working original Xbox or an Xbox 360 lying around somewhere. While the game was made backwards compatible with the Xbox 360, it wasn't made backwards compatible for any system beyond that. And the full game was never made digitally available on the Xbox Store, so you'll have to track down a physical copy for it. Luckily, I see physical copies on eBay floating around the $5 to $10 mark, so I would start there. Or unless you happen to be one of those people bright enough to get Xbox emulation working, then yeah, I guess that's an option too. I found out later that Brute Force actually had a prequel novel, and in Japan of all places, it had a tie-in comic. It looks like this. Make of that what you will. Brute Force did pretty decent sales upon its release. In fact, it actually became the fastest-selling original Xbox game in its first week of sales, even selling more than Halo did in its first week. It even sold well enough to get an Xbox Platinum Hits re-release. Despite this, though, the game never got a sequel, and it actually would end up becoming Digital Anvil's final game. If Unseen 64 is to be believed, a sequel was being prototyped sometime before the release of the Xbox 360, but for one reason or another, I guess Microsoft chose not to move forward with the project, and in January 2006, closed down Digital Anvil, integrating their workers into Microsoft's internal Redmond, Washington studio. An allegedly canceled sequel, the developer being shut down shortly after. Maybe this should have been a franchise graveyard video. But yeah, that's Brute Force, Xbox's forgotten shooter. I'll paraphrase what I said in my old deleted video. It probably won't set your world on fire, but if you do seek this game out, especially for the prices that used copies go for nowadays, you're bound to get some fun out of it, if you still have a machine that can run it. It's a shame this game never really got the attention that it probably should have, coming out and just sort of existing in Halo's shadow. Though I guess that's more of a testament to how much of a juggernaut Halo was, if just about every other Microsoft-published title at the time didn't really leave much of an impact, or otherwise just sort of fell into obscurity. Though, that's one of my favorite things to do on this channel, shine a light on games people might have forgotten about. Thanks for watching.